A political interview turned into a global shockwave when Leavitt suddenly said the new pope could change everything. What does she know that we don't? And why is the Vatican suddenly back in the headlines? Stay tuned. This gets deep. The studio lights glowed softly, the backdrop a haze of deep blue city lights flickering behind the set. The energy was calm but focused. Leavitt, sharp-eyed and poised in a deep magenta blazer, was seated across from the anchor, a familiar face, on late-night political panels. The discussion was everything viewers had come to expect, insightful, fast-paced, and unfiltered. Leavitt had made a name for herself in recent years as one of the youngest and most fearless voices in the conservative movement. Known for her clarity, confidence, and refusal to dodge the hard questions, her interviews often trended online, sometimes because of her insight, sometimes because of the controversy that followed. That evening's segment was supposed to be routine, a deep dive into the shifting strategies ahead of the next election cycle. The conversation kicked off with predictable fire: inflation, border security, government spending, and education reform. Leavitt was sharp as ever, delivering her views with precision and passion. She criticized economic mismanagement, praised grassroots school board efforts, and emphasized the urgency of protecting First Amendment rights. But just when it seemed the segment was heading toward a typical wrap-up, the host casually shifted gears. "Before we close out," he said, glancing at his notes, "have you been following the news coming out of the Vatican about the new pope?" There was a pause, short but noticeable. It was the kind of question often dropped in at the end of interviews for a little variety. Religion wasn't the main focus of the show. In fact, it rarely came up at all. But the host had clearly seen the headlines earlier that week. Cardinal Robert Prevost, a relatively lesser-known figure from the American clergy, had just been named the new pope. What happened next? No one expected. Leavitt didn't laugh off the question. She didn't change the subject or offer a polite nod. Instead, she leaned forward, her expression suddenly more serious, more thoughtful. The camera caught the subtle shift in her posture, the slight narrowing of her eyes. She smiled, but it wasn't the usual political grin. It was a knowing, almost prophetic expression. "Yes," she said, her voice slightly lowered but resolute. "And I think Pope Robert Prevost is going to change everything." The host raised his eyebrows. There was a moment of silence, as if even the producers in the control room were unsure whether this was a pivot or the beginning of something deeper. Leavitt continued, her words measured but deliberate. "Look, I know it's not every day you hear a political commentator bring up the Vatican in the middle of an election cycle. But what's happening right now with Pope Prevost's election is bigger than most people realize. This isn't just a change of leadership in a religious institution. It's a shift in global moral authority." The host tilted his head, curious. "How so?" Leavitt didn't hesitate. For decades now, the West has been in a tug-of-war between cultural decay and traditional values. People feel lost. There's confusion, not just politically, but spiritually. When someone like Robert Prevost, someone who understands both doctrine and the human struggle, steps into a position like this, people notice. They listen, even those outside the Catholic faith. She emphasized how Pope Prevost's background made him uniquely equipped to lead in this particular moment. He's not a disconnected academic. He's been on the front lines in Latin America. He's seen poverty, injustice, and broken systems, and he's never wavered on core truth. That kind of leadership doesn't go unnoticed. By now, the entire tone of the broadcast had changed. The host, clearly intrigued, let her continue. Leavitt leaned back, collected but intense. "This pope isn't just here to manage the church. He's here to challenge the world, and in doing so, he's going to influence the way people think, act, and even vote. Because whether we admit it or not, morality shapes policy." Viewers at home were no longer casually watching. They were hooked. Leavitt had just turned a late-night political segment into something deeper, something that crossed the boundaries of politics, religion, and global identity. Her final remark in that moment sealed it. "Mark my words," she said. "In the years ahead, Pope Robert Prevost is going to be one of the most talked about figures on the planet. And the reason is simple. People are starving for truth, and he's offering it." The host blinked, clearly taken aback, but not dismissive. He nodded slowly, then said what everyone at home was probably thinking. Well, that's one way to end the show. The interview cut to commercial, but within minutes clips were already circulating online. Leavitt had lit a spark, and it was only just beginning to burn. To truly grasp the impact of Leavitt's live interview statement, the one where she said, "Pope Robert Prevost is going to change everything," we first need to understand exactly who Pope Robert Prevost is and why his election matters more than most people realize. This wasn't just another papal election, and Robert Prevost isn't just another religious figure with a ceremonial title. His story and his mission go far deeper. A humble beginning with global reach, Robert Francis Prevost was born in Chicago in 1955, far from the ornate halls of the Vatican, and even farther from the kind of upbringing most associate with future popes. He came from a working-class family, grounded in faith and committed to service. From an early age, Prevost felt a calling to something greater, a life devoted to helping others. But unlike many who rise through ecclesiastical ranks by staying within the comfort of their own institutions, Prevost left his home country to serve where the need was greatest, in the rougher, more marginalized parts of Latin America. Fluent in Spanish and deeply connected to the people he served, Prevost worked for years in Peru, a country marked by both deep faith and deep struggle. There, he ministered not from a distance, but directly alongside the communities, in remote villages, urban centers, and impoverished parishes, always focusing on justice, compassion, and the dignity of the human person. His pastoral work wasn't just about preaching. It was about healing, building trust, and holding institutions accountable. He was known not only for his intellect, but also for his willingness to sit with the broken and listen to the forgotten. A surprising rise. Through the church, despite his humble approach, Prevost's leadership qualities didn't go unnoticed. Over the years, he rose steadily through the ranks of the Catholic Church, not by self-promotion, but by being exactly what the Church so often needed: a steady hand, a kind heart, and a fearless voice when it counted most. He was named a bishop, and then later appointed by Pope Francis as prefect of the dicastery for bishops, essentially the person responsible for helping appoint bishops across the globe. It was a powerful role, and one that signaled the Church's trust in his judgment, character, and global vision. Then, in a surprise move, Robert Prevost was elected Pope. To some, the news came out of nowhere. He wasn't the most famous cardinal. He hadn't been the subject of major papal speculation or media buzz. But to those who knew the inner workings of the Vatican and the deep needs of the Church, his selection made perfect sense. He was the right man for a difficult time. Bridge between tradition and reform. What makes Pope Robert Prevost especially important in today's world is that he doesn't fall into the usual categories. He's not liberal or conservative in the way we often divide our leaders. He's something far rarer, a thoughtful reformer who still believes in the timeless foundations of the faith. He is deeply traditional in doctrine, holding strong convictions about the Eucharist, the family, and the importance of prayer. But he's also unafraid to step into modern conversations: climate change, abuse accountability, gender roles in the Church, and the evolving role of religion in secular societies. Already, Pope Prevost has signaled that he intends to take on the hard issues: clerical abuse, not just cleaning up past scandals, but establishing long-term systems for transparency and prevention. Inclusivity and outreach, creating space for dialogue with people who felt marginalized by the Church. Global justice, speaking directly to political leaders about inequality, conflict, and the moral responsibilities of the West. He's not trying to make the Church trendy. He's trying to make it truthful and relevant without compromising its core. Hope, controversy, and the eyes of the world naturally. This kind of leadership doesn't come without controversy. Some traditionalists worry that his tone of openness could lead to doctrinal confusion. Others fear that his emphasis on justice and systemic reform could push the church too far into political territory. But for millions of others, especially younger Catholics and people on the margins, Pope Robert Prevost is already a figure of hope. A reminder that the church can still stand for something timeless while facing the real problems of today. And this is exactly what Leavitt saw. In her interview, when she brought up his name out of nowhere, not as a religious reference, but a cultural one, she wasn't just highlighting a new spiritual leader. She was pointing to a shift, a possible turning point, a pope with the heart of a pastor, the wisdom of a scholar, and the courage of a prophet. Pope Robert Prevost may be new to the papacy, but if Leavitt's words are any indication, his impact is already being felt. And as the world watches, it's clear. This is one leader who won't be ignored. Back on the broadcast, as the cameras rolled and the host sat in visible surprise, Leavitt wasn't done. She leaned slightly forward in her chair, her voice firm, clear, and deliberate. Pope Prevost is not just another religious leader, she said. He's a moral compass, stepping into a world full of confusion. Whether you're Catholic or not, what he represents, clarity, strength, values, is something people are desperate for right now. You could almost feel the studio quiet down. For a political commentator known more for hot takes on fiscal policy and education reform, this shift to global moral leadership wasn't just unexpected, it was electric. And Leavitt wasn't speaking in vague spiritual platitudes. She was being very intentional. She went on to praise Pope Prevost's clear stance on the sanctity of family, his emphasis on spiritual discipline, and his commitment to truth without compromise. But what made this part of the interview so impactful wasn't just her admiration, it was what she said next, and the tone in which she said it. Don't underestimate how powerful the Vatican can be in shaping global narratives, Leavitt warned. When a pope like Prevost speaks, world leaders listen, and so do voters. It was a moment that caused both the host and the viewers to pause. Some leaned in, others raised their eyebrows. But no one could deny what had just happened. This wasn't just religious commentary. It was something deeper, a political prediction. The Vatican's quiet power Leavitt's words tapped into something few in the mainstream media were acknowledging: the geopolitical influence of the Catholic Church. Often viewed as a symbolic or ceremonial institution, the Vatican is in fact one of the oldest and most enduring power centers on the planet. With over 1.3 billion followers worldwide, it wields enormous soft power. When the Pope speaks on issues like poverty, war, immigration, or family, it shapes how millions of people think and how politicians respond. Leavitt was pointing to a reality that political analysts often overlook. Moral authority influences political action. In an age where trust in institutions is crumbling, the rise of a respected moral voice, especially one as globally positioned as Pope Prevost, can disrupt everything from election messaging to foreign policy. A coded message, almost immediately. After the segment aired, social media lit up. Some viewers praised Leavitt's insight. Others accused her of veiled messaging. She just signaled to the base, one user posted on X, formerly Twitter. That wasn't a religious take. That was a political cue. Another commented, "What she said about voters listening to the Pope wasn't subtle. She's drawing a line between religious revival and political momentum." And indeed, some political commentators began dissecting her words like a riddle. Was she suggesting that Pope Prevost's rise would energize conservative voters, that his firm stance on moral clarity would inspire a political awakening in the U.S., or was it something broader, a forecast of cultural alignment between religious renewal and policy reform? Whatever the exact message, one thing was clear. Leavitt had dropped a bombshell. And it wasn't just about Rome. Faith and politics, a reconnection. For decades, the relationship between religion and politics has been debated in America. From civil rights pastors to evangelical voting blocs, faith has always shaped parts of public life. But in recent years, many believed that connection was weakening, especially among younger generations and more secular voters. Leavitt's comments suggested otherwise. She was hinting that the rise of Pope Prevost could reignite something that had gone dormant, a public craving for leadership, rooted in values rather than spin. And that could have major implications for elections, especially in a time when people are increasingly looking for authenticity, conviction, and moral certainty. A new era of influence? As the interview drew to a close, the host tried to shift back to domestic topics. But the energy had shifted. The mood had changed. Leavitt had opened a door that wasn't going to close easily. She had taken a conversation about policy and pulled it into the realm of spiritual awakening. Global leadership and political consequences, all in a few sentences. Whether you agreed with her or not, one thing was undeniable. She had connected the dots in a way few others had. And viewers noticed. By the next morning, clips from the interview were making the rounds. Headlines read, "Leavitt connects Vatican to 2024. New Pope, new politics? Is Pope Prevost the wild card in Western democracy?" Suddenly, it wasn't just about the church anymore. It was about culture, elections, and who controls the narrative of what's right and wrong. And as Leavitt warned, when a pope like Prevost speaks, people listen. Immediately after the interview aired, it was as if someone had lit a match to dry kindling. The reaction wasn't just fast, it was explosive. Within minutes, hashtags like Shout Pope Prevost, Leavitt Live, and Vatican Shift began, trending on X, formerly Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. Clips of Leavitt's comments, especially the moment she called Pope Robert Prevost a moral compass, were cut, reposted, stitched, and analyzed by creators across the internet. Some praised her courage. Others accused her of stirring the pot, but no one was ignoring it. "I don't usually watch political interviews," one TikTok user said in a now viral video. "But when Leavitt brought up the Pope like that, I couldn't stop watching." Divided reaction, praise, criticism, and everything. In between, as the video continued to circulate, the reactions broke into distinct camps. On one side were those who saw Leavitt as brave, someone unafraid to speak about faith in a political landscape that often treats religion as taboo. These supporters applauded her for connecting the dots between spiritual leadership and global politics. "Finally, someone is talking about moral clarity again," tweeted one supporter. "Leavitt gets it. This Pope matters, not just to Catholics, but to anyone who cares about truth." On the other side were critics who felt she had crossed a line. "The Vatican isn't a voting bloc," one post read. "Leavitt is politicizing the papacy to push an agenda." Some worried that invoking the Pope's influence in a political context blurred important boundaries. Others called it a strategic move aimed at galvanizing conservative religious voters. Still, there was a third, and growing, group. Those who weren't necessarily taking sides, but were simply intrigued. Who is Pope Robert Prevost? The world begins to ask. The most fascinating result of the interview wasn't the praise or backlash. It was the curiosity it ignited. People who had never paid attention to Vatican affairs suddenly found themselves Googling Pope Robert Prevost. Some dove into YouTube rabbit holes, watching documentaries on the modern church. Others downloaded podcasts about papal influence or started threads discussing Vatican diplomacy. Creators on TikTok began explainer videos. Here's what you need to know about Pope Robert Prevost in under 60 seconds. Why this American-born pope could change everything. Pope Prevost, the reformer no one saw coming. Clips of Prevost delivering sermons or speaking about human dignity were reposted with subtitles, reaction videos, and theological commentary. Even accounts dedicated to fashion and art weighed in, analyzing the Pope's vestments, his minimalist style, and what it might say about his worldview. A surprising number of non-religious users even joined the conversation. "I'm not Catholic, not even religious," one Reddit user admitted. "But this guy Prevost is interesting. He feels different, grounded, real." Another TikToker confessed, "I came for the drama, stayed for the history. I'm literally watching documentaries on Vatican politics at 2 a.m. What is happening to me? A new kind of papal moment in the digital age. Most religious stories tend to fly under the radar, except during scandals or major events. But this was different. What started as a casual mention during a political segment had turned into a worldwide conversation about moral leadership, spiritual responsibility, and the modern role of the Church. The Vatican, known for being traditionally slow-moving, was suddenly at the center of a viral moment. Not because of controversy, but because people were genuinely interested. The public wasn't just asking what Pope Prevost believed. They were wondering how his beliefs might shape the world. And that, according to some commentators, may be the most powerful thing of all. From broadcast to awakening. Back in the studio, Leavitt likely had no idea her remarks would cause such a storm. But sometimes, the right message at the right time resonates far beyond anyone's expectations. People are hungry, not just for political change, but for moral grounding, spiritual clarity, and a vision for the future that doesn't feel hollow or performative. Pope Robert Prevost, whether by divine timing or historical coincidence, has stepped into the spotlight at a moment when the world is searching for direction. And thanks to one unexpected exchange during a primetime interview, millions are now asking the same question. Could this Pope be the one who changes everything? So, why does any of this matter to you? After all, not everyone follows Vatican news. Some people may not be religious at all. Others might feel that church leaders and politics should stay in completely separate lanes. But here's the truth. What happened during that interview, and what followed online, matters far beyond the scope of one broadcast or one person. Because whether you're religious, spiritual, or completely secular, the intersection of faith and leadership is something that affects all of us. Faith doesn't exist in a bubble. It shapes the world around us. Let's face it, religion may feel personal, but it's also incredibly powerful on a global scale. Leaders like Pope Robert Prevost aren't just spiritual figures. They're influencers in the truest sense of the word. They shape how people understand morality. They influence how communities respond to crises. And yes, they have a ripple effect on how people vote, what policies they support, and which movements gain traction. Think about it. In many parts of the world, political leaders still look to religious figures for moral guidance. And millions of everyday citizens tune in to what their spiritual leaders say, not just on matters of faith, but on issues like climate change, immigration, economics, war, and peace. So when someone like Pope Prevost begins to speak clearly on values like justice, integrity, family, and truth, it doesn't stay in the pulpit. It spreads. Leavitt knew what she was doing. Let's go back to Leavitt's interview for a moment. Her mention of Pope Prevost wasn't offhand. It wasn't just an emotional comment. It was deliberate. And if you listen carefully, it was actually a very strategic move. Because in today's world, the lines between politics, media, and morality are more blurred than ever. Every soundbite is carefully crafted. Every name drop carries meaning. And this one, the Pope's name, struck a chord because it wasn't expected in that setting. Leavitt was discussing policy, yes, but by bringing Pope Prevost into the conversation, she signaled something deeper. We're not just in a political crisis, she seemed to say. We're in a moral crisis, and it's time to start talking about that. And when she pointed to the Vatican's influence on global narratives, she wasn't exaggerating. The Vatican has diplomatic relationships with over 180 countries. It's an observer at the United Nations, and its voice, when used, echoes. It's about the signals beneath the surface. One of the most important lessons here is this. Pay attention not just to what's being said, but to what's being signaled. When media personalities start referencing faith figures in political conversations, it often means something is shifting. People are craving more than data and sound bites. They're craving meaning, truth, and direction. And in a time when so many are disillusioned, with governments, with institutions, with each other, a figure like Pope Robert Prevost stands out. He's not a politician. He's not campaigning. But his presence, his message, and his identity represent something people are hungry for: clarity. Whether or not you agree with him, he's stepping into a role that's larger than religion. He's becoming a symbol of moral consistency at a time when very few public figures are trusted. What this means for you. Regardless of belief, you don't have to be Catholic to understand what's happening here. What you're witnessing is the start of a larger movement, a search for values in a time of chaos. A search that's not just happening in churches, but in schools, workplaces, families, and politics. And that's why the conversation sparked by Leavitt's interview matters. It matters because it reveals something vital about the world we live in right now. We're starving for leadership with heart. We're tired of spin, noise, and division. And many people, consciously or not, are looking for someone, anyone, to stand up and say, here's what really matters. Pope Robert Prevost, with his blend of tradition and transparency, is stepping into that spotlight. And the world is watching, some with hope, some with skepticism, but all with curiosity. Final thoughts, from viral clip to global shift? Few words in a late-night interview started a conversation. That conversation turned into a trending topic, and that trending topic might just be the start of something bigger, a cultural shift, a new awareness, or even a renewed interest in the role of values in public life. So whether you're religious or not, this moment matters, because leadership rooted in principle, not just power, has the potential to shape the future. And if Pope Robert Prevost truly is the kind of leader Leavitt believes he is, then this might be more than a news cycle. It might be the beginning of a global awakening. Thanks for watching. If this story gave you a new perspective or made you think about things a little differently, do me a favor. Hit that like button. It helps more people find this content. Subscribe to the channel for more thought-provoking stories at the intersection of faith, politics, and culture. And don't forget to drop a comment below. I want to hear your thoughts on Pope Robert Prevost and what you think this could mean for the future. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and as always, thanks for being part of the conversation.